The chamber was built to impress. That was its entire purpose. The Grand Assembly Hall of New Geneva Station, orbiting at the L2 point between Earth and the Moon, constructed at the insistence of the Keth Dominion as a neutral venue for interstellar diplomacy. Its ceiling rose 40 meters above the floor, inlaid with bioluminescent panels that cycled through the color signatures of all 17 member species of the Galactic Accord. It smelled faintly of ammonia and something sweet that no human could identify, a compromise atmospheric blend that left everyone slightly uncomfortable. That, too, was probably intentional. Ambassador Vale of the Keth Dominion stood at the central dais and did not look at the human delegation. He addressed the chamber at large, because that was how the Keth communicated displeasure. They spoke around you, the way a predator circles before it strikes. The Council has reviewed humanity's military posture across 17 independent assessments, Vale said, his translator rendering the words in crisp, unaccented English. The conclusion is unanimous. The species designated Homo sapiens maintains a weapons infrastructure disproportionate to its stated peaceful intentions and incompatible with full Accord membership. The Council therefore issues the following directive. He paused. In the Keth culture, a pause before a demand was a form of mercy, giving the lesser party time to compose themselves before the blow landed. All human military assets, including but not limited to orbital platforms, ground-based launch systems, submarine arsenals, and registered warship tonnage, are to be surrendered to Accord custody within 90 standard days. Noncompliance will be interpreted as hostile intent, and the Council is authorized under Article 7 of the Accord Charter to conduct corrective intervention. Corrective intervention. Two words that, in the last 4 centuries of galactic history, had ended 6 civilizations' independence permanently. The human delegation sat at a long curved table to the left of the dais. There were 9 of them, in dark formal suits that looked almost aggressively plain against the shimmering diplomatic robes of the other species. At the center sat Secretary General Amara Osai, 61 years old, a former structural engineer from Accra who had risen through Earth's unified government through a combination of extraordinary competence and an absolute refusal to be hurried by anyone. She did not flinch. She did not lean over to whisper with her advisors. She did not access her data tablet. She listened to the entire statement with her hands folded on the table and her eyes on Ambassador Vale. And when he finished, she was quiet for 4 full seconds, long enough that the Thalesi delegate shifted nervously in its fluid tank, long enough that the Keth observers in the gallery began murmuring. Then Amara Osai nodded once, as if Vale had told her something she already knew. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "The Earth Secretariat will consider the Council's position and respond within the allotted window. We appreciate the Council's patience." She closed the leather folder in front of her, a physical folder containing actual paper, which several alien delegates found inexplicably unsettling, and looked to the chamber moderator. "With the Council's permission, we'll adjourn." The moderator, a 4-armed Sulith who had run these sessions for 20 years, glanced at Vale. Vale gave a slow blink of assent, hiding his confusion behind protocol. No raised voices, no demands for clarification, no emergency recess to call Earth's Defense Council, no visible fear at all. Back aboard the Keth flagship Dominion's Clarity, Vale dictated his initial assessment to his intelligence staff. He included one detail that he flagged as potentially significant, the expression on the Secretary General's face when the ultimatum was delivered. He had studied human facial musculature extensively. He knew what shock looked like, what suppressed terror looked like, what diplomatic blankness looked like. What he had seen on Amara Osai's face in that moment was none of those things. If he had more experience with humans, he might have recognized it. It was the expression of a woman who had been waiting for permission. Commander Thesson had conducted 11 compliance inspections across 9 species in his career, and he considered himself good at his job, methodical, skeptical, impossible to charm. He arrived at Earth orbit on day 12 of the 90-day window aboard the Joint Inspection Cruiser Accords Measure, accompanied by 312 observers from 9 member species and enough scanning equipment to map a small moon's geology. The humans met him at the orbital transfer station with coffee. Not the synthesized kind, actual coffee, brewed from beans grown in soil on Earth's surface, transported up that morning on a resupply shuttle. Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair of the Earth Diplomatic Liaison Corps handed Thesson a ceramic mug with a small blue bird printed on it, and smiled the way humans smiled when they were being deliberately disarming. "We want to make this as easy as possible for your team," she said. "Full access, full transparency. You set the pace." Thesson accepted the coffee. He didn't drink it. He began his inspection. Over the following 31 days, Commander Thesson and his team were given everything they asked for. Every base they requested access to was opened within hours. Every weapons manifest they demanded was produced, cross-referenced, and confirmed by multiple human officials who answered follow-up questions cheerfully and at length. The surrendered hardware began arriving at Accord custody stations within the first week. Aging cruisers with hull stress fractures along their dorsal plating, fighter wings that Thesson's technical analysts quietly noted, were running drive systems 2 generations behind current Keth standard ballistic missile stockpiles that the Sulith ordnance expert on his team described in her report as quaint. It was all very thorough. It was all very cooperative. It was also, Thesson would later understand, a masterpiece of misdirection so elegant it functioned less like a lie and more like a conjuring trick, where the secret is that your attention was the weapon used against you. Lieutenant Commander Nair walked Thesson through the Eastern Pacific Fleet headquarters on day 19, a facility carved into a California coastal mountain that was genuinely impressive, vast, functional, staffed by serious people with serious equipment. What Nair did not mention, because Thesson did not think to ask, was that the facility's primary computational core had been migrated to a secondary location 18 months prior. The servers he was looking at were real. They were also no longer the important ones. On day 24, Thesson's team scanned a submarine base in the Norwegian Sea that showed exactly the submarine force recorded in Earth's official military registry, 41 boats, present and accounted for. The scan was accurate. The registry was not complete. On day 28, a human colonel named Adebyo walked Thesson through a weapons storage facility in the Ural Mountains with the kind of specific, technical enthusiasm that career military people show when they're proud of their work. Thesson left convinced the man was genuine. He was. Colonel Adebyo was genuinely proud of that facility. He had also never, in 22 years of service, held a security clearance above level 6. The things Thesson needed to find existed at level 14 and above, a classification tier that Adebyo didn't know existed. Every human who interacted with the inspection team was carefully selected, not for their ability to deceive. Most of them were simply not told what to conceal, because the safest secret is one that only the minimum necessary people carry. The 1,200 personnel who interfaced with Thesson's observers were professional, cooperative, and genuinely unaware of the things they were not showing. On day 31, Commander Thesson transmitted his preliminary assessment to the Council. Earth is complying in good faith. Surrendered assets consistent with registered inventory. No anomalous readings. Recommend conditional certification pending final audit. Ambassador Vale read the report, noted the recommendation, and forwarded it to the Council's Military Analysis Division with his endorsement. In a pressurized habitat 3 kilometers beneath Titan's methane sea, a woman named Dr. Sina Marchetti received an automated notification on a system connected to no public network. She read it, deleted it, and went back to work. The notification read, "Inspection team departing Sol system. Phase 1 confirmed complete." She started keeping the diary because her therapist told her to, and she kept keeping it because she had no one else to tell. October 14, 2031. They confirmed funding today. Not the cover project, the real one. Admiral Yusuf shook my hand and said, "Humanity is counting on you, Doctor." And I thought, does he know how often people say that to the person who's about to do something irreversible? Dr. Sina Marchetti was 34 years old when Project Aegis began recruiting her. She was the lead propulsion theorist at the International Deep Space Research Institute, known for a paper on zero-point field manipulation that most of her peers considered either brilliant or delusional, depending on how seriously they took the mathematics. Admiral Lin Yusuf, the founder of Aegis and the man who had spent 20 years convincing a succession of Earth governments to fund it, had decided the mathematics were worth betting civilization on. The project had started 6 years after first contact, not the friendly, cinematic kind of first contact that science fiction had prepared humanity for, but the sudden, overwhelming arrival of a Keth diplomatic convoy in Jupiter orbit that communicated, in essence, "We know you're here, we've been watching, and here are the rules." Earth's unified government had 3 weeks to respond to terms that were written, as one analyst memorably put it, for a species being brought into the fold, not invited to the table. Admiral Yusuf had sat in the back of that briefing room and watched his government's leaders process the reality that humanity was a junior species in a galaxy that had already divided up the power, and he had made a decision, not in anger, not in fear. In the same cold, precise way he'd made every significant decision of his career. He decided Earth would never be in this position again. March 3, 2033. We built the first prototype drive today. I say we, Dr. Akafer did most of the work. I just figured out why the theoretical model wasn't matching observed output. Turns out we were wrong about the field geometry. The correct model is more elegant. It's always more elegant when you find the truth. The drive puts out 40% more thrust than our best projections. I cried in the equipment bay for about 6 minutes and then pretended I had something in my eye. The Aegis facility beneath Titan was not the only one. There were 7 major construction sites. In Titan's subsurface ocean, inside a hollowed asteroid in the belt designated 2019 AC-7, 3 kilometers underground in the Greenland ice sheet, in a pressurized cavity beneath the Martian South Pole, and 2 orbital facilities that appeared on no public registry, masked behind debris fields and maintained by crews who lived on-site for 18-month rotations and signed secrecy agreements that their own families weren't told about. The people who worked in these places had given up ordinary lives for something they believed in, with a fervor that their colleagues in the public space program, if they had known, might have found frightening. They were not zealots. They were engineers and physicists and naval architects and tacticians who had seen the same data Admiral Yusuf had seen and arrived at the same conclusion. The Galactic Accord was not a community. It was a hierarchy, and the species at the bottom did not stay there unless they chose to. November 19, 2041. 10 years in, we have 12 ships, 12. I know it sounds small. Yusuf says it's not about the numbers yet, it's about proving the design. The design works. Every test we've run, every simulation, every live trial in the outer system, the Meridian class performs beyond spec. The Council's best warship would last approximately 4 minutes against one of ours. I wrote that in my official report, and then deleted it because I'm not sure I'm supposed to feel good about that. The diary runs for 41 years. It is the only personal record of what building Project Aegis actually cost, not in money, not in resources, but in the specific human weight of knowing something that changes everything and having nowhere to put it. Sina Marchetti missed her sister's wedding. She attended her mother's funeral via encrypted hologram from a habitat no one in her family knew existed. She had a relationship that ended because she could not explain the absences. She had another that ended the same way. She kept working. August 7, 2072. 712 ships. Yusuf has been dead for 9 years. I still write to him in my head sometimes. We have what he wanted, what I built, what we all built. Osai knows now. She came down last week and saw the fleet and she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked me, "Is it a shield or a sword?" I told her it was whatever we decided to make it. She nodded like that was the right answer. I'm still not sure it was. The transport that carried Secretary General Osai from Earth to the Titan facility was registered as a geological survey vessel, carrying a crew of 8 and a cargo of deep ice drilling equipment. It was not inspected by anyone, because survey vessels were boring, and boring was what Aegis had been banking on for 60 years. The descent into Titan's subsurface ocean took 4 hours in a pressurized submersible that groaned in ways Os found unsettling until the pilot, a young woman with the calm demeanor of someone who had made this trip 200 times, explained that the groaning was nominal, the hull contracting against pressure differential, and handed her a thermal flask of tea. Fleet Admiral Jonas Reyes met her at the docking collar. He was 67 years old, broad-shouldered, with a silver beard and the handshake of a man who had been doing physical work his entire life. He'd commanded the Aegis fleet for 11 years, having been recruited out of the conventional Earth Navy, where he'd spent his career quietly being too good for the assignments he was given. He said nothing as he walked her through the first airlock. He was waiting for her to see it herself. The primary construction bay of the Titan facility was 3.2 kilometers long. It had been carved, over 4 decades, from the bedrock beneath the ocean floor, by a succession of tunneling systems that removed material so slowly, and in such small increments that the thermal and seismic signatures were indistinguishable from natural geological processes. The ocean above absorbed everything else. In that space, and in the 6 adjacent bays connected to it, sat 240 warships of the Meridian class, docked in rows so precise they looked less like vessels and more like the teeth of some inconceivable machine. Each one was 400 meters long, with a hull profile that human naval architects had spent 20 years refining to minimize its cross-section across 17 different scanning wavelengths. They had a quality that Osai had not expected, standing before them for the first time. They were beautiful, not in the decorative sense. In the way that a solved equation is beautiful, the beauty of something that could not be any other shape than what it was. "How many total?" she asked. 712 combat-ready vessels, Reyes said, 40 support ships, 31 specialist platforms, electronic warfare, deep reconnaissance, mobile repair, drive systems fully charged, crews at ready status. He paused. "We've been at ready status for 6 years, ma'am." Osai walked further into the bay. Her footsteps on the metal grating were very loud. "What's the crew complement?" 80 per combat vessel, 40 per support. Full complement across the fleet, 61,840 personnel. 61,000 people living in secret beneath an alien moon. 61,000 people who had chosen this, who had given their visible lives to careers that were covers, who communicated with their families through intermediaries, who understood they might spend years in these facilities without ever surfacing, and who had made that choice because someone they trusted had shown them the same data Admiral Yusuf had seen in 2025 and asked, "What kind of species do you want us to be?" Osai stopped at the bow of the nearest ship and looked up at it. The hull was dark, a matte material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I need to know something," she said. "Not as Secretary General, as a person. When this fleet appears, when we do this, does it guarantee our safety? Or does it just guarantee a war at a scale the galaxy hasn't seen?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. This was why she had come in person, without staff, because this conversation needed to be between 2 people who could look at each other. "It doesn't guarantee anything," he said, "but neither does surrender. The Council's history with species that disarmed the Veth, the caretakers of Loris, the Elindri, none of them are sovereign anymore. This is the only play that gives us a seat at the table." He looked at the fleet. "Not because we threaten them, because they realize we can't be managed." Osai stood there for a long time. Then she said, "Brief the crews. We'll respond to the Council on day 90. Council's occupation force arrived at the edge of the Sol system at 600 hours UTC on the 90th day, exactly as scheduled. 208 warships, the largest single Accord deployment in 40 years, arranged in a formation that the Keth called the enveloping reach, a posture that communicated both overwhelming force and the promise of restraint if compliance was immediate. Council Admiral Drexeth of the Keth 7th Fleet transmitted the standard compliance demand at 6:02. This is a lawful accord enforcement action. All Earth Secretariat representatives are to transmit formal surrender documentation within the hour. No hostile action has been taken. No hostile action will be taken provided compliance is confirmed. You have 60 minutes. At 6:03, a single response transmission arrived from Earth. Text only. No video, no diplomatic trappings. Council Admiral Drexeth, Secretary General Os, requests that the Council observe the following demonstration before further communication. Recommended observation. Full sensor array, all frequencies. Coordinates attached. Drexeth looked at the coordinates. They pointed to a patch of space on the far side of the Sun, currently behind the solar disk from the Council fleet's position, which meant they would need to reorient to observe. He recognized it as a calculated inconvenience. He ordered the fleet to adjust position, because whatever the humans were about to show him, he intended to see it clearly. It took 11 minutes to reorient. At 6:21, the Council fleet's sensor arrays came fully online, oriented toward the coordinates provided. At 6:22, they registered nothing, empty space. Drexeth was about to transmit a demand for clarification when his tactical officer made a sound he had never heard from her before. A soft, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. "Admiral," she said, "multiple contacts." "How many?" A pause. The kind of pause that means the system is running the count a second time to confirm it isn't wrong. 753 contacts bearing across a 180-degree arc. Range, another pause. "They're everywhere, Admiral. They're behind the Sun. They're above the ecliptic. There are contacts emerging from Jupiter's shadow, from the asteroid belt." Her voice stopped. Then, very carefully, "Sir, they were hiding in the outer system, all of them. They have been there for. The thermal signatures suggest months." Drexeth stared at his display. The ships were appearing the way stars appear when your eyes adjust to darkness. First one, then 3, then dozens, then so many that the individual contacts blurred into something that looked, on the sensor display, less like a fleet and more like a field. 753 vessels, moving in formation. His tactical AI completed its threat assessment in 11 seconds, far longer than usual, because it kept encountering design specifications that didn't match any known database entry and defaulting to error states. When the assessment finally resolved, it delivered a single line that Drexeth would remember for the rest of his life. "Warning, hull profile, drive signature, weapons configuration, and tactical geometry of detected vessels do not correspond to any registered or unregistered human military design. Estimated threat classification, extreme. Confidence in assessment, 94%. Confidence in database, 0%. They had never seen these ships before, not one of them. Humanity had not upgraded its military. Humanity had replaced it entirely with something that had never appeared in any intelligence report, any sensor sweep, any diplomatic communique in 60 years of contact. At 6:31, Secretary General Osai's transmission arrived. Video this time. She was sitting at a plain desk. No flags, no ceremony. Behind her was a window, and through the window was a view of Earth from orbit, blue and white, exactly as it always looked, unchanged. "Council Admiral," she said, "I think we have some things to discuss." The council chamber on the Accord Central Station had never seen anything like what happened in the 6 hours after Drexeth's sensor report reached the council. The Thalesi delegation evacuated to their ships within the first 20 minutes, not out of cowardice. Their senior delegate was careful to specify, but out of a procedural requirement to consult their homeworld government before any further deliberation. The procedural requirement had not existed before that morning. The Keth called 3 closed sessions. The Sulith senior ambassador, a being of formidable composure who had presided over 30 years of Accord deliberations, was observed in a corridor between sessions standing completely still for 9 minutes, which was their species' equivalent of a breakdown. And in the intelligence divisions of 11 member species, analysts began a frantic review that all of them arrived at independently, and none of them initially believed. The question was simple: how? Not how had humanity built the ships. That was engineering, and engineering, however impressive, was legible. The question that cracked open like a fault line beneath the confidence of 11 civilizations was, how had they hidden it? The Keth Intelligence Service was the oldest and best funded in the Accord. They had been monitoring Earth since 17 years before first contact. They had signals intercepts going back to Earth's first primitive radio transmissions. They had 36 active deep cover assets on Earth's surface at the time of the ultimatum, and 4 inside Earth's official defense ministry. Not one of them had produced a single piece of intelligence pointing to Project Aegis. When the Keth Intelligence Director reviewed the personnel files of the 4 ministry assets in the hours after Drexeth's report, she found something that turned disbelief into something colder. All 4 assets had provided reliable, consistent intelligence for years. They had reported accurately on budget debates, strategic doctrine, fleet deployments, and internal disagreements. Everything they reported checked out. Because everything they reported on was real. Their human handlers had understood from the beginning that the safest information to let the Keth collect was true information about the visible military, about public debates, about the things that didn't matter. It kept the assets trusted. It kept the Keth satisfied. It kept their attention exactly where humanity needed it, on the stage set, not the machinery behind the curtain. They didn't run a deception, the Keth Intelligence Director told the Council in closed session. They ran a performance, for 60 years, with thousands of participants who each only knew their own part. The Council's communications security expert, a Sulith, raised the question everyone was thinking. How do you maintain operational security at that scale, across that many people, across 6 decades? You don't tell them, someone said. Everyone turned. It was the Thalesi delegate who had returned from her ships looking shaken. You don't give people secrets to keep, she continued. You arrange the world so that the people who interface with the outside only see what you need them to see. The human officers who cooperated with Commander Thessen's inspection, most of them weren't concealing anything. They genuinely didn't know what to conceal. The secret wasn't in the minds of the people the Accord was watching. It was in a layer the Accord didn't know to look for. The silence in the chamber was profound. What was terrifying was not the fleet. Fleets could be matched, eventually. What was terrifying was the institutional sophistication required to do what humanity had done, to look, for 60 years, like exactly what you needed your observers to believe you were, while being something else entirely underground. Ambassador Vale sat in that chamber and replayed the moment Amara Osai had closed her folder, thanked him for his time, and adjourned the session. The expression on her face. He finally understood what he had seen. It wasn't relief. It was the satisfaction of a plan reaching its final step. She spoke for 11 minutes. No notes, no teleprompter, no diplomatic team whispering in her earpiece. The feed went out simultaneously to the council chamber, to every Accord member world, and in a decision that the council had not been consulted about, to every inhabited planet and station in human space, broadcast on a public channel at the request of Earth's own citizens, who had been told that morning what their government had built and why. Amara Os had expected anger about that, had prepared for it, had war-gamed it with her cabinet, had accepted it as the cost of doing something her species would have to live with. What she had not expected was that millions of humans who watched the initial announcement would feel something closer to vindication, not because they had wanted a war. Because for 60 years, they had felt the quiet, accumulated weight of being treated as a lesser species, and they had wondered, in the ordinary way of people who don't make policy and don't have security clearances, whether anyone was doing anything about it. Someone had been doing something about it. In the council chamber, she did not begin with the fleet. She began with the Veth. The Veth were a spacefaring species, she said. They developed FTL travel approximately 200 years before humanity. When the Keth Dominion approached them for Accord membership, they were invited to disarm as a condition of entry. They complied in good faith. Within 40 years of their disarmament, they had lost their homeworld's water rights to a Keth extraction consortium. Their outer colonies had been absorbed under administrative mandate, and their population, which had been approximately 12 billion at the time of the Accord, now stands at 900 million, living on 3 worlds they do not govern. She paused. I want the Council to understand that we read the Accord's own records. We know what happened to the Veth. We know what happened to the caretakers of Loris. We know what happened to the Alindri. These are not ancient histories. These are case studies. She looked directly at the camera. Humanity joined the Accord in good faith. We accepted every inspection, every limitation, every condescension, every moment of being spoken to as though we were children who had stumbled into a room full of adults. We did this not because we accepted the premise that some species are junior and junior species are managed, but because we understood that proving that premise wrong required patience. It required building something that could not be argued with. What you saw in the Sol system today is not a threat. It is a demonstration of what a species can accomplish when it decides to take its own survival seriously. We are not asking the Council to be afraid of us. We are asking the Council to recognize us. Then she laid out her terms. The Accord Charter was to be renegotiated. The tiered membership system, which divided species into developing, established, and sovereign categories with vastly different rights, was to be abolished. Every species at the Accord table would hold equal vote. The corrective intervention provisions of Article 7 were to be struck entirely. Disputed territory claims would be resolved by a new arbitration body with no permanent members. Economic extraction rights would require the consent of the species on whose territory resources were found. These are not radical terms, Osai said. They are the terms you would have written if you had assumed from the beginning that everyone at the table deserved to be there. And then she said the thing that would be quoted for the next 400 years. Humanity spent 60 years making itself appear small so that the Council would feel safe enough to show us exactly what it does to civilizations it believes cannot protect themselves. We are grateful. We now know exactly what we were protecting ourselves against. She let that sit for 3 seconds. We hope the Council will find our terms acceptable. We have no interest in conflict, but I want to be very precise about this. We are no longer interested in acceptance either. We are here. We will remain here, and the terms we have offered are the most generous we intend to make. She reached forward and ended the transmission herself. In the Council chamber, no one spoke for a very long time. The negotiations lasted 41 days. 3 species walked out on the 6th day, the Keth Dominion, and 2 smaller members whose economic arrangements with the Keth made loyalty to them a matter of survival. They departed the chamber with formal statements of protest and the visible expectation that their withdrawal would cause the process to collapse. The remaining 14 species signed without them. This was the moment more than the fleet's appearance, more than Osai's speech, that permanently altered the political geometry of the galaxy. Because the Accord had functioned for 3 centuries on the assumption that Keth participation was non-negotiable. The Keth were the largest military power, the oldest continuous spacefaring civilization, the architects of the original charter. The idea that the Accord could exist without them had never been seriously considered, in the same way that you don't seriously consider whether a building can stand without its largest wall. The building stood. The remaining 14 signed, and within 6 weeks, 2 of the 3 Keth-aligned species that had walked out quietly made contact with the new Accord Secretariat to explore the terms for re-entry. The Keth themselves said nothing publicly for 30 days. What they were doing privately, Earth's intelligence apparatus observed with careful attention, running simulations, reviewing the fleet specifications that their technical teams had reverse-engineered from sensor data, and having a very long series of internal arguments about what to do next. They arrived, eventually, at the conclusion that Admiral Reyes had predicted they would arrive at, that the cost of conflict with humanity was incalculable, and the benefit of continued opposition was negative. 47 days after the signing, the Keth Dominion submitted a formal application for re-entry to the new accord. OSA approved it. She insisted that the Keth be seated at the table like everyone else, without ceremony, without a separate negotiation, without any gesture that acknowledged the power they had once held. They took their seat. They voted on their first resolution, a procedural matter about meeting scheduling, and the vote was counted exactly the same as every other vote, weighted by nothing except the fact of their membership. Ambassador Vale was not present. He had retired, citing health reasons, 3 weeks after the fleet appeared in Sol's system. His retirement was the first entry in a pattern Earth's analysts noted: a quiet, steady turnover in the Keth's diplomatic and intelligence leadership, as the generation that had designed the ultimatum was replaced by a generation that had to live with its consequences. Fleet Admiral Reyes began the process of standing down the Aegis fleet from combat posture, not decommissioning, not demobilizing, but shifting from active alert to standard patrol. The ships began appearing in public registries for the first time. Crews were rotated to surface assignments. 61,000 people who had been living in the dark, in secret facilities under moons and inside asteroids and beneath ice sheets, began reconnecting with the world that hadn't known they existed. Some of them found the transition harder than others. 20 years in a classified facility does something to a person, not a bad something necessarily, but a permanent one. They had been part of the largest secret in human history. Now the secret was over, and they were ordinary people again, and some of them weren't entirely sure how to be that. Dr. Sina Marchetti declined 3 consecutive requests to be interviewed, then accepted the 4th because it was from a 17-year-old student who sent a handwritten letter, actual handwriting, on actual paper, asking her what it felt like to build something you hoped would never have to be used. She read the letter 4 times before she responded. In the interview, which ran for 2 hours and was watched by 900 million people, she said a lot of things. The one that people remembered was this: the ships were never the point. The point was buying enough time for the galaxy to grow up. I hope we bought enough. On the day the new Accord Charter was formally ratified, Secretary General Ose attended the ceremony on New Geneva Station, the same chamber where Vale had delivered the ultimatum, and signed the document on behalf of humanity with the same black pen she had used to close her folder 14 months earlier. She had kept the pen in her jacket pocket every day since that session, for reasons she didn't fully explain to anyone. After the ceremony, she went back to her office and read the morning intelligence briefings. 3 items required her personal attention. She handled the first 2 quickly. The third was a preliminary assessment from the Deep Space Observation Network. Anomalous signals from beyond the Keth border territories. A pattern that didn't match natural sources and didn't match any known species communication signature. She read the assessment twice, set it aside, picked it up again. Then she opened a new file, typed 4 words at the top: Project Patience, initial directive, and began writing. Because that was the thing about humanity that the Council had never understood. The fleet was what they'd built while they were waiting. The question was always what they'd build next. End of story.